It's my very great pleasure this evening to welcome Emma Boon from the TaxPayers Alliance. The candidate's here to speak, and she's going to speak on sin.
Thanks very much for having me here this evening. I won't ramble on for too long. Probably just have a chat for about 10 minutes, and 10-15 minutes, and then take questions if anyone wants. So, sin taxes, as are they? Taxes that are imposed on certain products or services to try and reduce the occurrence of something that the state considers to be unwanted. So what does our government tax the most? Alcohol, fuel and tobacco. Most of the price that you pay when you go and fill up your car with petrol, most of the price you pay at the pump is tax. It's not actually the cost of the fuel itself. There's even been talk in recent years of trying to bring in a fat tax on unhealthy foods. We already have a range of green tax. So let's focus on alcohol and on tobacco and on fuel. It's very easy sometimes talking about sin taxes because they're sort of things that are frowned upon. Society doesn't really like drinking. We consider smoking to be pretty anti-social these days. And more people don't think it's a good idea to drive because it's harmful to the planet. But whilst I'm talking to you this evening, I just want you to remember that all of these things are legal. They're products that we're allowed to buy, they're things that now, you might wonder what all this has to do with freedom. Well, are you really free to choose what you want to buy if you're heavily taxed on certain products and certain services? Or are you actually being coerced, pressured into not spending your money on those things? Does it work? Is it fair? And are we free if the government's doing this? I don't think that we are. I think there's actually a risk that we're slowly creeping towards a sort of Amish state where we don't drive, we don't smoke, and we don't drink. But there's also another issue here, which is that people don't really like paying a lot for things, and especially don't really like paying a lot of tax. So people will try and find ways around it. If you tax cigarettes heavily, people will go and start buying more and more their fags in the duty-free when they're on holiday. If you start putting up the price of alcohol, will people start buying bootleg booze? Or as we saw last week, people will start brewing bootleg booze to sell. So does the taxman even, in the worst case scenario, have the blood of 5 people on his hands who were brewing alcohol illegally last week, and their illegal booze factory blew up and then 5 of them died? So all these things, people are being driven towards these sorts of behaviours in a way by high taxes. High taxes encourage smuggling and illegal produce. None of those things are very good. In some cases, we know that the illicit alcohol and cigarette markets can actually encourage gangs and fund gang behaviour, or even worst case scenario, things like driving. People living out in remote places, you might want to put up tax on petrol, but what about those people that are living out in the middle of nowhere? Yes, they choose to live there, but they don't have a great public transport infrastructure. So let's improve the public transport. Well, that's again not necessarily a very good idea, because let's go back to the reason why we were putting up fuel duty in the first place. And one of the reasons used as a justification by the Treasury is that this is a sort of a green tax that will try and discourage people from driving. But in fact, if you're running lots of empty buses around the countryside, and you've got people who are living in sparsely populated areas, then you're still going to have the problem of generating all that carbon. You're not solving that problem, and you've whacked a huge tax on those people that need to use those cars, like the elderly, people with young children who need to get them to school, people that need to use their cars to get to work, who live in sparsely populated areas, and people who have disabilities who need their cars for themselves to get around or for someone else to Now, let's look at the facts. What happened in the last budget? Tobacco. The government announced an increase on tobacco duty rates by 2% above inflation. So on 1,000 cigarettes, that meant an increase from about £119.03 to £154.95. So that means a smoker who smoked 20 a day would be paying about £30 more. HMRC's estimates on how much this loses, how much revenue this loses in 2008-2009 was between £500 million and £2.2 billion. So it's difficult to even estimate how much tax we're losing from pushing up the tax on a packet of cigarettes or on your rolling tobacco and actually increasing that illicit market. Alcohol again, alcohol duty rates increased by 2% above inflation in the last budget. So that meant about an extra 4p on a pint of beer. That's £8.62 over the year if you drink 7 pints a week, or a pint a day on average. That equates to, if you're a wine drinker, 15p on a bottle of wine, or 54p on a bottle of and fuel, despite a vigorous campaign by groups like ourselves and by the media. In fact, The Sun had a very big campaign against the fuel duty rise, Chancellor still refused to abandon the planned fuel duty rise and whacked another penny onto the burden for motorists. And we know that not all the money that we collect from fuel duty and from vehicle excise duty, or that's road tax to you and me, actually goes on things like building roads or maintaining roads, or on public transport, or on all of that, and on green carbon reducing policies. Even once we've paid for all of that, there's still a massive excess left over, which simply goes into the Treasury's pockets and gets spent how the government wants. So not even all of this money is directly going on counteracting carbon emissions or on improving our roads. So we're sort of unfairly penalising motorists by whacking this fuel tax up. How do we compare to other countries in the world? Well, if you've ever been on a ferry coming back from France, look at the queues of lorries filling up at Calais to know that we're doing a lot worse than the French are on fuel duty. Recently, Rob Halfon started a Fair Fuel group this week, which I urge you all to go and have a look at the webpage and go and sign a petition there and campaign for fairer fuel duties. Our other two sin taxes on fuel and on alcohol are among the highest in Europe. And why sin tax is a bad idea? Well, in case you hadn't already got the idea of this, they aim to force a change in people's behaviour, and that doesn't necessarily work. There's an argument that smokers and drinkers inflict higher healthcare costs, and in fact you might think that it's fair that they pay for those higher costs. But as unpleasant as it may be to consider this, smokers and drinkers often die earlier than the rest of us, so their lifetime costs could in fact be lower. If you look across the whole of their lifetime healthcare spend. Also, there are people that live in other ways that are detrimental to their health, and it's very difficult to punish fairly all of these people. What about people that really like skydiving? That's quite a dangerous activity. Or people that cross the road without looking both ways. You can't tax all of these things, and yet these are all things that could potentially inflict costs on society in other ways. They might not actually make money out of any of these taxes. As discussed, if you raise the tax on a packet of cigarettes, that increases the illicit market. And it's very difficult to measure that market in the illicit trade and how much that could lose us. But we do have some examples of this. Over in Ireland, they actually froze the duty on cigarettes in the 2010 budget. And they admitted that they believed that high prices were giving rise to massive amounts of cigarette smuggling. They had a study that was based on research by their version of HMRC. So whatever you think about the health effects of smoking, if you look at that research, it shows that about 1% increase on the price of taxed cigarettes led to a 3.6% decrease in consumption. So smokers were switching to the black market. That's the only solution. They certainly weren't giving up smoking. So about 20% of cigarettes in Ireland aren't actually Irish to tax. A lot of this research is a bit shady because it's done by sort of things like going through bins and looking at the cigarette packets. So it's very difficult to measure. But still, the conclusion is that people that the incentive was there with the increased prices to switch to black market brands. So what's the solution to all of this? I think that there are public health concerns, and there are environmental concerns about driving, about smoking, about drinking, and these are genuine concerns, but that shouldn't cloud the facts here. That's that these sin taxes are irrational. They're not raising us any more money, and we need a more rational tax policy overall. We are looking at this through the work of the 2020 Tax Commission, which John O'Connell, who's here, our research director, is leading, and that's been running for about 6 months now. They've been meeting, they've been hearing evidence, and they're discussing overall how our tax system should look in 2020. And as part of that, they'll be looking at sin taxes. They'll be reporting early next year. So keep an eye on our website if you want an update on that. We don't have the answers yet, but we are continuing to push those who don't. We're continuing to push those who smoke, those who drink, and those who drive towards behaviour that they wouldn't otherwise indulge in. And we continue to push them away from buying legitimate products and services. So
on August the 15th with Matt Sinclair, and so do hope you'll all come along to that. So would you please give Emma Boon a very big round of applause.